For 7 months I had been talking to whatever was dying behind the third door on the west gallery, and in all that time I never once asked what it was. That was my first mistake. You would think, in a palace this size, that someone would have warned me. I worked the night rounds, which is the work they give you when they have decided you are no one. The cold corridors, the dead hours, the lamps that need trimming while the whole hold sleeps, and no one of any consequence has to look at your face. I had been no one in the iron hold for 2 years by then, which was 2 years longer than I had been anything else, and I had made a kind of peace with it. A broom is honest work. A broom does not care what your name was before, but the third door on the west gallery was always locked, and always guarded by day, and on my night rounds the guard was never there, and behind it, every night for 7 months, something suffered. I do not mean it wept. I mean it made the low, wrong sound a creature makes when the pain has gone past noise and settled into the bone. I heard it the first week, on my knees with a rag, and the rag stopped moving, and I knelt there in the dark on the cold stone, and I listened to a thing in agony 3 inches of oak away from me, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with a hurting thing. I talked to it. Soft, and low, and about nothing. The way my mother talked to the fevered children she sat up with, in the village we were turned out of when I was 12. I told it the corridor was cold, and the night was long, and I was sorry, whatever it was, that no one had come. And when talking did not reach it, I did the other thing my mother did, the thing that lives under everything I am. I hummed. An old scrubbing song, a wash-house tune with no words anyone remembers. The kind of thing that gets passed hand to hand among women who work with water. I hummed it through the door because it was the only gift I had on me, and the sound behind the door stopped. Not all at once, but it eased. The wrongness went out of it, slow, like a fist opening, and after a while there was only breathing, deep and steady. The breathing of a thing that has finally been allowed to rest. I should have been afraid. I want that understood. A locked door, a guarded door, a door with something terrible behind it that the whole palace pretended was not there. A wise woman walks past a door like that, and trims her lamps and minds her own small life. I am not, it turns out, always a wise woman. So I went back. Every night, I knelt at the third door on the west gallery and I hummed a washhouse song to a thing I never saw. And the thing went quiet, and I went on with my rounds, and in 7 months I told no one. Because who would I tell? I was no one. The night rounds were mine because no one wanted them. The thing behind the door was mine, for the same reason. I thought it was a sick hound, some prize wolfhound of the king's, gone wrong in the head, kept out of sight to spare the king's dignity. That is what I told myself, on the nights I let myself wander at all. I want to find the woman I was, kneeling there, humming, certain it was a dog. I want to put my hand on her shoulder and tell her, whatever you do, do not let them dismiss you, because the morning they did, the whole hold nearly came down. Her name, my name, is Orla. I was 24 that winter, a woman grown and long past anyone's leave to be in the palace at all, and I was dismissed on a Tuesday for the crime of being seen. The mistress of the household did the seeing. Lady Ingrid, the king's aunt by courtesy, his late mother's sister, the woman who had run the iron hold with a ring of keys and a voice like a closing ledger through all the years the king's grief and the king's troubles kept him from running it himself. She found me on the west gallery an hour past dawn, when I should have been long abed, with my ear close to the third door and the last of the washhouse song still in my throat. I saw her face change. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. She had spent 2 years building something delicate and expensive on the foundation of the king being unwell, and she had just found the broom girl who was, without knowing it, the single loose stone under all of it. You, she said. How long have you been coming to this door? There is no good answer to that question from a maid who is not supposed to be there. I gave her the true one anyway, because I have never been able to make my mouth lie when my hands are clean. 7 months, my lady. The hound behind it suffers at night. I sit with it. Something went across her face that I would spend the next 3 days learning to read, surprise, and calculation, and then a smooth and total decision. There is no hound, she said. You are dismissed. Collect your things and be past the outer gate by midday. If you are found inside these walls after the bells, you will be taken up as a thief. She turned, keys chiming. And you will not speak of this door to anyone, or I will see you taken up as something worse. I did not argue. You learn. Being no one, that argument is a thing the comfortable can afford. I collected my things. I had few. I was past the outer gate before the noon bells, with a heel of bread and a winter cloak, and the particular numbness of a woman who has been turned out of somewhere for the second time in her life, and is determined not to let it show. I did not even reach the bottom of the hill before I heard it. It is not a sound I have words for. The whole hold made it at once. The bells crashing out of their hours, the gates grinding shut, a roar that was not a man, and was not quite a wolf, and was both, that rolled down the hill, and stood the hair up on my arms, and stopped me dead on the road with my heel of bread in my hand. Behind me, the iron hold was screaming. And I, turned out, dismissed, no one, stood on the road and felt the thing I had been humming to every night for 7 months come apart at last. And I knew. The way you know the weather is about to break, exactly whose pain that was. I turned around. Of course I turned around. I will spare you the climb back up the hill and the argument at the gate, because the argument at the gate ended the moment a second roar came over the walls, and the guards decided that a madwoman wanting in was the smallest of their problems. They let me through into a courtyard gone wrong with panic. Servants flat against walls, warriors with iron drawn, and no one to point it at, and Lady Ingrid on the steps of the great hall, with her keys in her fist and her face the colour of tallow, giving orders no one was obeying, because there is no order that stops what was happening inside. I went up the steps. No one stopped me. A nobody in a courtyard of terror is invisible twice over. The great hall of the Iron Kings is a long stone room built to make you feel small, and at the far end of it, on the dais below the wolf throne, the most feared alpha in 4 territories was losing the war he had been fighting in secret for 7 months. I had never seen the king's face. I saw it then, for 1/2 second, before the rest of it took him, a hard, proud, exhausted face. A man white-knuckling the last of himself, with the whole of his court watching the thing he had hidden from them finally win. His men had cleared back to the walls. His mistress of the household had told the hold for 2 years that the king was merely grieved, merely tired, merely in need of a strong marriage to steady him. And here, in front of all of them, was the truth she had been papering over. The king's wolf had slipped its master, and a slipped wolf in a stone hall is a death sentence with no name on it yet. It saw me. The great dark shape of it, half a man and half a beast, and all of it wrong with pain, swung its head across that whole screaming hall and fixed on the one still point in it, me, in the doorway, in my dismissed maid's cloak. And it went quiet. The hall did not understand. I watched 200 wolves fail to understand it all at once. The thing that had been about to kill its own court stood swaying on the dais, and looked at a broom girl, and the wrongness went out of it the way it had gone out of the thing behind the door, slow, like a fist opening. And then, because I am who I am, and have never once had the sense to do otherwise, I started to hum. The washhouse song. Across the length of that terrible hall. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect, and I walked toward it, not away. The way you walk toward the spooked horse, and not the door, humming an old tune about water and work. And the king's wolf came down off the dais, one heavy step at a time, and crossed the hall to me, and lay down at my feet, like a thing finally allowed to rest. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard the bread fall out of my hand, which it did. That is the moment everything I thought I knew turned over. Because Lady Ingrid, on the steps, found her voice, and what she said into that ringing silence was witchcraft. She has bewitched the king. Seize her. It was clever. I will give her that. Looking back, it was the cleverest thing she could have said, because it was the only story that let her keep her marriage and her keys and her 2 careful years. A maid who calms a king's wolf is a miracle no one can use. A witch who has been controlling him is a thing you burn, and then you go on selling the king a bride to steady his poor bewitched mind. Hands took my arms. The wolf at my feet came up off the floor with a sound that emptied the hall of every soul who could still run, and would have done worse. Except that the man came back into it then. I felt the bond do it. Though I had no name for the bond yet. A wrench in the air like a held breath let go. And where the wolf had been there was the king of the Ironhold on his knees on the stone, fully a man again, grey and shaking and staring at me as if I were the answer to a question that had been killing him. "Don't," he said, to the men holding me, to his aunt, to the whole hall. "Do not touch her. My lord, she has kept me alive for 7 months." His voice was a ruin, but it carried. A king's voice is built to carry even in pieces. He got to his feet, and it cost him, and I watched a proud man let his court see exactly what it cost, which I would later understand was the bravest thing I ever saw him do. There is no hound on the West Gallery. There has never been a hound. There has been me. And every night for 7 months, something I could not control was eased by a sound through a door, and I did not know what it was. And I told no one, because a king whose wolf is slipping is a king the strong wolves come to challenge. He looked at me, and the pride in his face cracked clean down the middle. I owe my hold and my life to a woman I dismissed this morning and never even saw. "What is your name?" "Orla," I said. "Orla." He said it like he was setting it somewhere safe. "I am Roderick, and I appear to owe you everything, which is a great inconvenience to us both. I want to tell you I curtsied. I want to tell you I behaved. What I actually did was look at the strongest king in 4 territories, swaying on his own dais, undone in front of his entire court by a broom girl's washhouse song, and say the truest thing in my head, which was, 'You should have come to the door yourself.' I'd have hummed twice as long for a please. The hall did not know what to do with that. Neither did the king. His face did a thing it had plainly not done in a long while. It almost smiled. And the almost was worse for him than the wolf had been, and I knew, watching him fight it, that I was in a great deal of trouble. I'll stop us there a moment, on the dais, in the silence, before the hold remembers itself, because if you've come this far with me, through the locked door and the song and the strongest king in 4 territories brought down to the floor by a broom girl, then I think you'd want the next of these to find you. Following along is the only way it will. There, that's the whole of my asking tonight. Now, the part that came after, which no one warned me about either. They did not let me leave after that. You do not turn out the only thing standing between your king and ruin, even if she came in on a broom. I was given rooms, actual rooms, with a window and a guard who I think was as much to keep me in as anyone out, and a great deal of frightened, furious attention from people who 3 days before would not have learnt my name to save their lives. And I was given, that first night, a conversation I keep. He came to my door himself. No guard, no escort. The king of the Ironhold, standing in a maid's borrowed doorway, with a look on his face like a man who has decided to do a hard thing before he can talk himself out of it. He did not come in. He stood 3 steps back in the corridor, which I would learn was its own kind of courtesy from a man who had spent 7 months unable to trust the space around him. "I need to understand it," he said. "How you did it. Whether it was what she said." "It was a song my mother taught me," I told him. "There's no craft in it. I've hummed it over fevered children and sick goats, and a man who was dying of the cold once, and it's never bewitched anything but a kettle into boiling slower." I held his eyes, because someone had to, and no one in that hall had dared to all evening. "I didn't know it was you, my lord. I thought it was a hound. I sat with a hurting thing in the dark because no one else would. That's the whole of the witchcraft." He was quiet a long moment. "Do you know what you're telling me?" he said at last, low. "You're telling me there was no magic in it. No fate, no bond, no reason. You're telling me that for 7 months the thing that kept my wolf from killing my own people was an unpaid maid being kind to a monster nobody told her was a king." His jaw worked. "I have been waiting to find out it was destiny. That would have been easier to carry than this." "Than what?" "Than the fact that anyone could have done it," he said. "And only you did." I had no answer for that. I am usually good for one. I stood in a borrowed doorway with the strongest man in the territory 3 steps away, telling me that my plain, stubborn kindness was harder for him to bear than a curse. And I felt the floor of my careful no one's life tilt very gently. And I could not for my life have told you which way was down. He left. He did not close the distance. Neither did I. But that was the night I stopped thinking of him as the king and started thinking of him as Roderick, which is a far more dangerous thing to do. I will not pretend the hold made it easy. I was the maid who had unmanned their king in open court, and a court is a thing that survives by knowing who outranks whom, and I scrambled every line of it, just by being alive. The wolves who had been quietly sharpening themselves against a slipping king now had a new and stranger weakness to circle, and Lady Ingrid, who had lost her witch but not her 2 careful years of work, was very far from finished. She came to me on the 3rd day, alone, with her keys silenced in her fist so they would not chime, and that silence told me more than her words did. "You think you've won something," she said. "You haven't. You've made yourself the most expensive thing in this hold to keep, and I have made a study of expensive things. There is a marriage I have spent 2 years arranging, a strong pack, a strong bride, an alliance that keeps this hold from being broken apart by the very wolves you've just shown how weak he is. That marriage saves more lives than your little song ever will. And it cannot happen while the king is making eyes at a broom." She stepped close. "So you will leave. Tonight, quietly, with gold, before you cost this hold a war. Or you will leave some other way. I have buried better than you, girl, and called it a fever." It was the 2nd time in 3 days she had threatened my life, and the first time she had done it with her own mouth, and no story to hide behind. I should have been afraid. I had spent 2 years learning to be exactly as small as the comfortable needed me to be. I found I had lost the knack. "You kept him sick," I said. It came to me as I said it, the way the truest things do, all her careful pieces falling into one shape. 2 years he's been grieving and tired and in need of a strong marriage. 2 years you've run this hold on the back of a king too unwell to run it himself. His wolf didn't start slipping on its own, did it? A king who got well would take his keys back. I watched it land. What were you giving him, my lady? In the tonic for his nerves, the one only your hand prepared. Her face went very still and very white, and in that stillness I had my answer. And I understood I had just become a thing she could not afford to let walk out of that room alive. She did the cleverest, coldest thing. She smiled, and she said, loud enough for the guard in the corridor, "She's threatened me. She's threatened the king's own aunt." And then, quieter. "Just for me, lockdown law is still in force, girl. Inside these walls. In a lockdown, my word is the king's word until he lifts it. And I am going to tell them you were caught running to the rival pack with the king's weakness in your mouth. Traitors are dealt with before dawn. He'll never even hear of it until you're cold." They took me that night. That is the near thing. That is how close it came. Lockdown law, an aunt's word standing for a king's, a maid with no rank and no witness, and a story already written, walked down to the lower gate in the dark, to be handed to the men who do the quiet work before dawn. What Lady Ingrid had not counted on, what she could not have counted on, because she had spent 2 years making sure the king did not know his own strength, was that Roderick had taken to walking the West Gallery at night. To the third door. To the place where, for 7 months, the only mercy he had ever been shown had come to him through 3 inches of oak. He was standing at that door, I think, the way you stand at a grave. When Gunnar, his second, the one man Lady Ingrid had never been able to buy or break, came running with the word that the witch maid was being taken to the lower gate on the mistress's order. I did not know any of that, walking down to the dark. I knew only that I had been right about one woman and wrong about my own odds, and that being right is a poor cloak against the cold. We never reached the gate. He came through the lower corridor like the wolf had come down the dais, not as the wolf this time, but as the man, with Gunnar and a dozen blades behind him, and the look on his face was the look of a king who has just understood the full size of the thing that has been done to him. In his own hold, under his own roof, for 2 years. The men holding me let go so fast, I nearly fell. "On whose order?" Roderick said. Very quiet. The quiet was worse than the roar. "The mistress of the household, my lord." Lockdown law. A traitor. There is no traitor. He was looking at me when he said it. Then he was not looking at me. He was looking past me, to the top of the stair, where Lady Ingrid had come down with her keys finally chiming, too late, having heard that her quiet work had stopped being quiet. What happened on that stair was law and old hard wolf business, and I will let you imagine most of it. Gunnar's men, and the locked storeroom where the tonic was mixed, and the herb wife in the lower town who had sold the mistress wolfsbane in careful doses for 2 years, and was very willing when the king's men came to say so. The marriage she had built collapsed in a single night, because no rival pack ties itself to a hold whose mistress has been poisoning its king. But here is the part that was mine. She came down the stair toward me, not toward the king, toward me, because a cornered creature reaches for the thing that undid it, and she had a blade out of her sleeve that no one had thought to look for on a king's aunt. And she was fast, and the men were all watching the king. I saw it come. I have spent my whole life watching the hand that's about to strike. You learn it. Being no one, you learn to read a blow before it lands. I did not freeze. I stepped in, the way I had walked toward the wolf, and I got my arm up, and the blade meant for the soft of my throat opened the meat of my forearm to the bone instead. And I felt it, and I did not let it take more than the arm. It brought a heartbeat. A heartbeat was all Roderick ever needed. He had her wrist before the second strike, and the blade rang on the stone, and the strongest king in 4 territories held his own aunt by the arm in front of his whole gathered hold, and did not kill her. That is the thing they still tell. In the iron hold, the king who did not kill the woman who had poisoned him for 2 years. He set her down before his court. He named what she had done, every careful drop of it, in a voice the cold stone carried to the rafters. And he took her keys, her name, and her place, and sent her past the last marker with the mark of an oathbreaker cut, where every pack from here to the sea would read it. Which is worse. Anyone who has lived among wolves will tell you that is worse than the blade. And then, with my blood running off my arm onto the stones of his lower gate, the king of the Ironhold turned to his court and did the thing that cost him most of all. He told them the truth, the whole of it, that his wolf had been failing, that he had hidden it out of pride, and the pride had nearly killed them all, that the hold still stood, because a dismissed maid had been kind to a monster in the dark when no one made her, and asked nothing, and never knew his face. She owes this hold nothing, he said. It owes her everything. She will be Luna in it, if she'll have a king who has to be sung to sleep, and any wolf with a word to say about the broom may bring it to me. My arm was bleeding. The hall was silent. Somewhere up the west gallery, behind a door that would never need locking again, the night was very quiet. You're asking me to marry a man I have to hum at, I said. I'm aware of how it sounds. In front of everyone. In front of everyone, he agreed, who watched me crawl across this floor for you. I find I've stopped minding what it looks like. It took a great deal of pride to get here. I had a great deal. It is a strange thing to make a hall full of terrified wolves laugh. I have made a habit of it since. I recommend it. He closed the distance then, the first time either of us had, and he kissed me at the lower gate of his hold, with my blood on both of us. And something I had walled up the day they turned my mother and me out of a village 12 years gone came down all at once, quiet, like a thing that had only ever been waiting for someone to lean on it. When it was done, I was crying, and so, I noticed, was the king, which his court has also never let him forget. A year on, near to the day, the third door on the west gallery stands open. It is a sitting room now. There is a window where the dark used to be. There is a chair beside the king's at the high table, and the woman in it has a long, pale scar down her right forearm that aches before rain. And she does not hide it, because the king will not let her. He tells every visiting lord that needs reminding exactly where his Luna's blood was spilled and on whose order, and what came of the one who spilled it. His wolf has not slipped once since the poison left him. But on the nights the old hardness comes back into him. The nights a king carries too much, there is still a song, an old washhouse tune with no words anyone remembers, hummed low by a woman who learned it from her mother over a tub of cold water in a village that turned them out. The court has stopped pretending not to hear it. Some of them, I am told, have started humming it themselves, badly, when they think no one is near, because it turns out everyone in a hard place wants to be sung to. It was never witchcraft. It was never even fate, in the end. Though the fate turned out to be real too, his wolf had it right from the first night through the door. It was only this, that I sat down in the dark beside a hurting thing nobody would name, and I was kind to it. Because being kind to the thing nobody will name is the only useful skill I have ever had. I built a whole life out of being no one. It turns out I was terrible at it. So tell me, did you guess, before he did, that there was no magic in it at all? And wherever you are listening from tonight, a hard place, a cold corridor, somewhere with its own door you walk past and do not open, leave the lamp low and the latch off, and follow along, and I'll have another for you next week. Her side of it, the way these are always told. The quiet women, it turns out, are the strongest wolves in the room. I always suspected. I just had to be turned out of a palace to find out for certain,